You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a follow-up piece on Gary Lineker, and this is about Jeremy Corbyn and why, for the first time in my life, I hope Labour lose an election, the next general election in the United Kingdom, which I've never in my whole life thought. I have always thought that no matter how bad Labour are, the Tories will be better. Sorry, the Tories will be worse. This time around, I still think the Tories will be far worse, but I have my reasons. So Gary Lineker came out in support of refugees with a very mild, nice comment, and it's all blown up into an absolute shitstorm, and the BBC are wearing the fact that they are the handmaiden or the crumb maiden of the UK's toxic, noxious Tory party that have been in power for years. 5 prime ministers deep, each one worse than the last, levels of corruption and incompetence and austerity that have hurt everyone in the whole country. The worst possible people on earth, the worst right-wing government in a major country left. The weirdest thing that's come out of this whole Gary Lineker story is that the public and a lot of people that are celebrities that have commented on this have drawn lines that have continually gone back to 2 things. One of them is Jeremy Corbyn and one of them is the current Labour Party, and broadly pointing out that the BBC, who are attacking Gary Lineker over his political view, have trashed the previous Labour leader, even though that meant we got Boris Johnson and Brexit. And so did the Guardian newspaper, and then every other newspaper is right-wing. Every single one. So even the people that would have been friendly towards Labour, well, apart from the Mirror, but the Daily Mail, the Express, the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun, like the whole media landscape in the UK is just so pro-Tory. It's the only reason why for 40 years the country has been decimated by neoliberal post-Thatcherite economic policy and hating on immigrants and people that aren't like you to look over there. So Jeremy Corbyn's name keeps coming up. One, because the BBC facilitated trashing him on a daily basis, whilst apparently that was impartial, and also because he's such a good man. He's such a decent man. He has always, his whole life, stood against racism, and yet he's the only political leader in modern UK history that has been relentlessly called a racist, because he supports Palestinian human rights and because the Israel Promotion League in the UK is so powerful that he was cut off despite being the best opportunity. He's basically Bernie Sanders. He's a really nice guy. He's honest. He's genuine. He's stood up on the barricades decades ago against racism, and he's the only one, when you've got people like Boris Johnson's Tory party trashing Brexit on a racist level, making sure that everything they can make about race. Boris Johnson himself said that Muslim women look like letterboxes, and they've been racist on a daily basis for years and no one cares. But because Jeremy Corbyn stood up for Palestinian solidarity and human rights, even people like The Guardian ran this relentless campaign of anti-Semitism, which apparently only existed in the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn took over and finished when he left. For some reason, the exact same thing happening either side of his tenure didn't happen, even though it did, even though no one accused him of being an anti-Semite. They said he presided over a Labour Party that was, even though no one cared either side of his tenure in office. He is a great man, and what the media did to him in the UK was a shocker. Relentless wall-to-wall demonisation to stop anyone that opposes economic neoliberalism and promotes real change, like Bernie Sanders, but he got it much worse than Bernie Sanders got. They trashed him and they went for something. They couldn't go after him on being a socialist because the public wouldn't have bought it after 10 years of Tory austerity. It wouldn't have carried any weight. So they had to do the one most disgusting act they did, a reason why I'll never register for the Guardian newspaper, and the BBC were as much involved, which is call him a racist. Call the one man that stood up against racism his whole life a racist. a shocking display, the worst attack on a politician I've seen by the mainstream media ever. And I'll never forgive The Guardian for doing so. And now we've got the replacement for Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer. No Labour Party should ever be led by a peer. What has he done through his life to be that young and get a knighthood? That's not someone I want leading a Labour Party. And now we've got Keir Starmer's Labour Party are doing the Tony Blair thing. So the UK has been, the Labour Party in the UK has been dominated by Blairites, Tony Blair people, from the start. From the start of the 2000s. Tony Blair came in and won a couple of elections that Labour would have won anyway with Murdoch-friendly policies. He was a big friend of Rupert Murdoch. No Labour leaders should be friends of Rupert Murdoch. No Labour leaders should be a peer when they're as young as Keir Starmer. That denotes that you're in bed with the wrong people to be the leader of the Labour Party. So Keir Starmer, he's running the worst Labour Party I've seen in my lifetime. It's awful. It's absolute trash. But the reason why I hope that Keir Starmer's Labour Party loses, and I've never hoped a Labour Party loses either in Australia or in the UK. The UK is already trashed. It's not going to get any better with a neoliberal version of the Labour Party in power. It will get worse under the Tories, but maybe it needs to get worse because there are these rusted on Stockholm Syndrome Tory voters in the UK that are working class that won't ever wake up until it gets so bad. The reason I don't want to support Keir Starmer's Labour Party is this, in a nutshell. We have been bludgeoned over the head for 20 years that the only possible electable version of the Labour Party is one that isn't Labour, but Tony Blair, Murdoch-friendly, water down all your policies for the working class and economics, become like the Tories but nicer. And we're told over and over again the only reason that Labour gets elected is because of that. It's complete crap. Tony Blair won 2 elections where the Labour Party would have won with Donald Duck in charge. The Tories have been in power for 18 years. We're in the midst of the most unbelievable corruption and meltdown. Anyone who was Labour leader then, John Smith was Labour leader, he was waltzing to an election win and he died. And Tony Blair came out of nowhere and was appointed by Murdoch, and no one said, wait a minute, who the hell is Tony Blair and why is Murdoch supporting him? And he took 2 elections. On his 3rd election, he lost 60 to 70 seats. A huge decimation, but just limped over the line and then was kicked out over his strong support of George W. Bush's war in Iraq, the strongest in the world outside of America. Ever since, we've been told that the only possible way Labour can get elected is this right-wing version of Labour. And we get it in Australia all the time, people like Joe Hildebrand saying, Labour are only going to get elected if they become more like the Tories. This is garbage. Tony Blair lost 60 to 70 seats in his last election. Every single Blairite since has lost. I don't want Keir Starmer's Labour to win because for the next 20 years, even though Keir Starmer will have only won because of the fact that the Tories have cycled through so many prime ministers and so much corruption and so much hatred that anybody would beat them. But what will happen is the journalists at The Guardian, pretending to be centrist or reading both sides, will tell you that the reason that Keir Starmer won and Jeremy Corbyn lost is because Keir Starmer cuts off everything that is special about Labour. Because he moves the Labour Party so close to the Tories, that's why he won. Rubbish. Jeremy Corbyn had the Brexit vote against Boris Johnson after 2 years of relentless negative press by the entire press of the UK. He had no possibility of winning that. The previous election against Theresa May, he blew people away. The whole country was behind him, so the media had to step up for their wealthy benefactors to protect neoliberalism and particularly not be critical of Israel's behaviour towards Palestine. So if Labour win, they're just going to do the same thing again. They're just going to say, see, Keir Starmer, he's central, he's not too much of a lefty. I want a left-wing Labour. That's why I vote Labour. I don't want a mini Tory party. Keir Starmer wouldn't even come out and support Gary Lineker until he knew that the public were behind him. He actually let some of his MPs go out and criticise Gary Lineker. This is not a good bunch of people. They've even kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party. Let's see who would win a popularity contest between Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn never got voted out of the Labour Party. He quit. He won 2 elections as leader because they forced him to do a second election, because they weren't putting up with someone that actually stood up for these non-neoliberal economic values and human rights. They weren't prepared. How dare he? So we've ended up with Keir Starmer, the worst UK Labour Party in my lifetime, when we could have had, instead of Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn and a raft of the most beneficial to the UK policies in our history. And we threw it away, and we did it to ourselves. So I don't want Labour to win. I think it's better for the UK and it's better for Labour in the long run if Keir Starmer loses badly against the worst party ever to stand for an election, the current Tory party. And they won't be able to turn around and say, oh look, it's because he was like Tony Blair. Crap.